Hey, what's up guys, Matt Laidlaw here. So in today's video I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I wanted to talk about the top 4 Harley-Davidson misconceptions that I read about in the comment section and in various chat rooms and stuff like that online. And it's interesting because I never really hear these misconceptions come up in person and in real life, and I don't know if that's because a lot of times people on the internet are just limited to stuff they read on the internet or stat sheets, and they haven't actually ridden Harley-Davidsons and they haven't ridden a variety of motorcycles. And a lot of the people that I meet and talk to in real life, in the real world, have ridden these bikes and typically understand these things, because a lot of this stuff is just kind of general knowledge and common sense in my opinion. But since these same things get brought up over and over and over again, a lot of times on my videos and certainly in other videos, I'm going to bring these up and just talk about them real quick, and hopefully this clears up some of the top misconceptions that I find that people have on the internet about Harley-Davidsons. Okay, so let me start off with the first misconception that I hear very frequently, and that misconception is that Harley-Davidson only uses old technology and they don't innovate and they don't come out with the latest and greatest technology, and they're just way behind the technology curve when it comes to other motorcycles. And people's reasoning behind that is they say that Harley-Davidson doesn't need to spend the R&D, research and development money, and really spend the money to innovate and keep up with the technology curves and trends, because people just blindly buy their motorcycles regardless of the fact that they're old, dated, obsolete technology. And so that's kind of the misconception, either that Harley is just so cocky and arrogant that they think that people will just buy their bikes because of the badge on the side of the tank that it says Harley-Davidson, that people just blindly spend their money just because of the name. So that's the misconception. So let me clear that up a little bit here for just a few minutes. So my idea and interest to even make this video in the first place first came from a video that I made at the dealer announcement meeting last year in 2016, when they announced the 2017 models, and they announced their brand new engine, the Milwaukee 8 engine. And at the time I thought I'd make a video that a few people would watch, but the video blew up and it has about 750,000 views, and it's turning out to be the #1 most viewed video on the internet, on YouTube, on this new Harley-Davidson engine. And as a result of this video, it spawned just a whole bunch of conversations from people in the comment section, talking about, well, a lot of things about Harley, but #1, about how this new innovative engine is in fact a antiquated old piece of crap, because it has 4 valves per cylinder, and 4 valves have been out for a long time. It's been a technology that's been used for a long time on a lot of different motorcycles. Okay, so to even begin to understand this misconception, you really have to understand the root and the core values and engineering that make up a Harley-Davidson big twin engine. So let me start off by talking a little bit about that. So what makes up a Harley-Davidson engine is the fact that it's a 2-cylinder, 2-piston, big twin, long stroke, big bore engine, 45-degree angle. And the key trait about a Harley-Davidson is it only has 1 pin connecting the 2 piston rods to the crankshaft. And so because of that, it has an uneven or non-symmetrical firing sequence. So where a normal engine, like a normal inline 2, inline 4 engine, really any engine for that matter, is going to have more symmetry between the firing cycles, the combustion cycles of the engine. So normal engine might sound something like this, where you have a real steady, even combustion cycle, whereas on a Harley-Davidson, since they have both of the connecting rods connected to the crankshaft with 1 pin, you've got a cycle that sounds more like something like that. And when you have a higher RPM, obviously it all kind of melts together. But that's kind of where the old saying on a Harley-Davidson, or the old description on a Harley engine, is it sounds like a potato sound. So basically Harley-Davidson will never stray from these core engineering principles. for a couple reasons. For the reason that it's not going to sound like a Harley-Davidson if they stray away from that single connecting pin, and it's not going to look like a Harley-Davidson with its iconic V-twin engine with a longer stroke than bore. This is an under-square engine, for those of you who understand the difference between the under-square and over-square. An under-square engine has a long stroke, a smaller bore. An over-square engine has a bigger bore than the stroke, but I'll go into that in a little bit. But Harley-Davidson, it has a lot of technology in the bikes. This bike I'm riding here is a 2014 Street Glide. The infotainment system in this thing is state-of-the-art when it comes to motorcycles. You've got navigation, USB, Bluetooth on this thing. You got hydraulic clutch on these bikes. You've got ABS brakes. It's this linked ABS braking system. The fuel injection and the ignition timing and everything is all state-of-the-art on these bikes. So Harley-Davidson integrates a lot of technology into their motorcycles, but the engineering, or the technology I should say, is very selectively implemented in their bikes. They don't just throw the latest and greatest technology on their bikes so that they can say that they have it. That's not who they market to. That's not what their customer buys a Harley-Davidson for. So the other thing I like to bring up when this subject comes up as well is past bikes that Harley-Davidson has come out with that were technologically advanced, and bikes that they're going to be coming out with. In 2002, Harley came out with this little bike called the V-Rod that I guess people forget about, but during its time, it was extremely technologically advanced. Even today, the engine, the displacement's gone up, but basically the main engineering behind it is still the same, and it's still considered a engineering marvel in the motorcycle world. It had 4 valves per cylinder. A lot of people say, oh, Harley-Davidson, they finally figured out 4 valves per cylinder. Well, no, Harley's actually, they dated back to the early days of, I think, like the 1930s and 1940s. Harley, for a little bit of time there, they had a 4 valves per cylinder bike, but even in more recent years than that, the V-Rod was 4 valves per cylinder and had a dual overhead cam, slipper clutch, and just a lot of technology that people always talk about Harley-Davidson not having. Well, the V-Rod, they've sold a lot of V-Rods, but the bike hasn't been one of its main core sellers since its inception in 2002. So Harley-Davidson has to stick to what people love about Harley, and that is these air-cooled big twin motors. So that ends, Harley-Davidson just 2-3 years ago, they announced the Livewire. And so the Livewire is their 100% electric powered Harley-Davidson. And so that bike, they've said in the next 2 or 3 years, it will go mainstream and you'll be able to pick it up at your local Harley dealer. So everything from the frame on that bike, all the way down. And while I'm talking about the frame on the V-Rod was really, really advanced manufacturing technology. It was a hydroformed frame where they actually bent the frame with high pressure water systems, and just the technology was extremely advanced on that bike. Discovery Channel did a really good special on that motorcycle if you guys ever want to see more about it. But really, the point I'm trying to make is Harley-Davidson definitely comes out with advanced technology on their bikes. There's a lot of technology that is on the bike that I think a lot of people don't even realize, but Harley-Davidson will never compromise the aesthetics and the core engineering of their V-twin at the benefit, if you want to call it a benefit, of having a more modern engineering design. The other comment I usually say to people too is, all the motorcycles are still using circular wheels. I mean, the wheel design came out with the Caveman, and we're still using it today. So just because push rods and an air-cooled engine has been around for a long time, and its technology has been around for a long time, doesn't necessarily make it bad technology. But what Harley does do is it fine-tunes that old engineering and technology to kind of give you the best of both worlds, modern day reliability and comfort, and you still got that soul and heart of Harley-Davidson, and the mechanical feel and the sound and the look and everything that really makes a Harley-Davidson a real enjoyable bike to own. Okay, so I think I've belabored that point a little bit too much. Really, I could talk about that subject all day long, but let's move on. So number 2 is the misconception is that Harley-Davidsons are too slow, they're underpowered, they're just these big, heavy slugs, and they have a big displacement, but the horsepower they get per cubic centimeter of displacement is really low. So let me touch on this for just a minute. Alright, so at the root of this misconception, there is a unfair comparison that is always drawn that kind of spurs up this misconception, and that is everybody wants to compare a sport bike to a Harley-Davidson. And that couldn't be a more absurd comparison in my eyes. I mean, that's like comparing a Cadillac Escalade to a Toyota Supra. One has, good storage capacity, better for long trips, and more passenger room. The other one is built for speed, higher revving engine. The Escalade has better towing power, better torque, and so it's just a totally unfair comparison. That's like comparing a Olympic powerlifter to an Olympic sprinter, and that's like saying the powerlifter is lesser of an athlete because he can't beat the sprinter in the 100-meter dash. Well, that's absurd. One of them trained for strength and power and lifting, and the other one is a completely different body makeup and has trained and is built for sprinting. So I find that a lot of the comments on the chat rooms and things like that go something along the lines of my Yamaha R1 has 1,000 cc displacement and it produces 170 horsepower, and your Harley has 1,690 cc's and it's only got 80 horsepower. Well, that's a ridiculous comparison, and if anybody knew anything about the engineering makeup of both of the bikes, they would draw the conclusion that that's a stupid comparison. So basically, like I've said before already, a Harley-Davidson has a longer stroke than bore, which makes it an undersquare engine, and a sport bike that's water-cooled is an oversquare engine, has a bigger bore than it does a stroke. It's also water-cooled. Because of these two facts, these inline-4 engines can produce a higher RPM. And at a higher RPM with twice as many cylinders, you're making twice as much work. Well, more than twice as much work. And so you're going through a lot more combustion cycles. A higher RPM, more combustion cycles, equals a higher horsepower. Now, a Harley-Davidson, if you do some tweaks to it, cams and things like that, you can get the horsepower up on a Harley-Davidson, definitely. But horsepower, really, once you hit a certain horsepower torque combination, you're getting to the point where you're basically building a racing bike, and that's what these leader bikes, these Japanese leader bikes are. They're racing bikes that are designed to race at a MotoGP, and so they're not very practical on the road. So for practicality, everyday purposes, I much prefer a Harley-Davidson because they're more than capable of exceeding the speed limit, and they just have a lot more practical attributes about them. That being said, I know people are going to think that I'm coming off as a sport bike hater. I in no way am a sport bike hater. I love sport bikes. They're incredible machines. But if you're a guy that is looking to get the most horsepower per dollar spent, do not buy a Harley-Davidson. If you're looking for a bike that is going to stop as quickly as possible and accelerate as quickly as possible for the least amount of money spent, do not buy a Harley-Davidson. If those are your primary motivating buying characteristics about a bike, then yeah, buy a sport bike. By all means, they're awesome bikes. But and that's why there's more than one motorcycle out there, because there's different things that people want out of bikes. I love sport bikes. They're amazing machines, but they're not comfortable. They put me in this hunched position that, after, an hour or so, it starts to play a toll on your back and your wrists and all sorts of things. And, they're just, going down the road. There are these light bikes that get blown around by the wind a lot, and that kind of leads me into my next topic, and that is on the weight of Harleys. People talk about Harley-Davidsons being really heavy like it's a bad thing, and really it's not a bad thing. Yes, if you're racing on a track and you're at the Moto Grand Prix, then yeah, weight's a bad thing. But if you're riding a bike on streets for practical purposes, especially if you're on a highway, going on the highway at 65, 70 miles an hour, weight is actually a good thing. The Harley-Davidsons have a lot better kinetic energy than a sport bike does, and that's, the beneficial energy you get from movement and weight. And so Harley-Davidsons are a lot smoother, and you get more of that feeling like you're going a lot slower than you really are on a Harley. It's like when you get into a high-end luxury vehicle and you're going down the road. A lot of times you're doing 80 and you feel like you're doing 50 or 60 in a high-end luxury vehicle, and that's the feeling that you get from a Harley-Davidson as well. So that, Harley-Davidsons, they have a lot more equipment on them than a sport bike does. You've got bigger seats, you've got the fairing, you've got radios. The raw materials in a Harley-Davidson, they're just, more robust frames. You got saddlebags in a lot of cases, and so you just get a lot more equipment on a Harley. Again, drawing the comparison of a Cadillac Escalade. Look at that. Look at a Cadillac Escalade, bigger seating capacity. You got a lot more equipment on there, better towing power, better torque, and that's really, the best comparison I can draw when people are comparing a sport bike to a Harley-Davidson. The other thing is everybody wants to talk about horsepower, but nobody wants to talk about torque. Well, Harley-Davidsons are torque monsters. That's where they excel on the stupid stat sheet, if you look at it online or on the dyno or whatever else. And the Harley-Davidsons have a lot more torque than some of these sport bikes that I mentioned previously. And it's funny, that's like, when you just talk about horsepower and you don't talk about torque, to me that's meaningless. When someone tells me like the specs of an engine and they just tell me what the horsepower is, but they leave torque completely out of it, I'm like, okay, that's great. What about the torque? You got to have both. It's kind of like when you see a football player on TV, they tell you what his weight is and what his height is. They give you both. So, one without the other is kind of meaningless. I mean, if you have all the torque in the world and no horsepower, basically what you have is a tractor going down the road. This really slow tractor that can pull anything, but it's not going down the road very fast at all. But if you've got all the horsepower in the world, but you don't have enough torque, you've basically got a bumblebee, going for you. A lot of buzzing and a lot of wing flapping, but absolutely no pulling power. If you took a rod and you extended a rod off of the back of like your rear wheel, torque would be, its ability to push, or its pushing power. Torque is the work. If horsepower is the rate at which work is being completed, torque is the actual work that's being completed. So they're both very important. Different engines favor one more over another. Harley-Davidsons definitely favor torque over horsepower, but at the end of the day, Harley-Davidsons are not slow at all. You're going to be faster than probably 95% of the cars out there on the road, and a lot of your speed and your ability to, not that you're going to be racing on the street, but a lot of that is going to come down to just the rider. Can a Harley-Davidson beat a 1000cc sport bike? No, absolutely not. But let's face it, if you're going down the highway, and for all practical purposes, Harley-Davidsons are plenty of power for the road and what you need them for. And quite frankly, when I'm riding a sport bike, I'm never really satisfied on a sport bike unless I'm doing 100 miles an hour. There's just nothing fun about a sport bike unless you're really turning sharp, going through the canyons, or really revving out the engine at a high RPM. If you're doing the speed limit on a sport bike, and this is just my opinion, guys, if you're doing the speed limit on a sport bike, they're really no fun. That's why, if I was a guy that went out to the track a lot, I would love to have a sport bike and do track days. Or if I had a sport bike to hit up the canyons and stuff, that would be great because that's what they're fun doing. Harley-Davidsons, you can have fun on a Harley-Davidson going places and abiding by the speed limit. Now, I'm not saying I'm always doing the speed limit at all times, but I'm also not a crazy reckless rider out there either. Okay, so that's enough on that subject. So that brings me to misconception number 3, and that is that Harley-Davidsons are overpriced, and really all you're paying for is the name, and that Harley-Davidson can charge their customers too much money because they're brand loyal and they're just blind to the Harley-Davidson nameplate, and really they're not worth the money. So let me dive into this for a second. So first of all, no one's going to argue that Harley-Davidsons are heavier than a lot of the other motorcycles that are out there that they get compared to. So what do you think that weight comes from? It comes from the raw materials that are used to build a Harley-Davidson. So what is raw materials? Raw materials are things like the steel, the aluminum, the chrome, the paint, the leather, the rubber, the plastics on it, the electrical, everything that makes up the Harley-Davidson and the raw materials that make up a motorcycle. So obviously, no one's going to argue that Harleys are heavier. So how can you argue that there's more raw materials involved in making a Harley-Davidson? Therefore, the cost is going to be higher. So that's the first part. And the second part is just quality. Really it comes down to the quality of the parts. The fit and finish is second to none, especially in the motorcycle industry. But things like the paint, Harley-Davidson uses a 3 mil clear coat on their paint, so it's a really thick clear coat when you compare it to other motorcycle manufacturers and even car manufacturers. Just the way that they shape their tanks, the welding on their frames, it's all very, very clean. They leave no ugly, unsightly weld marks when they manufacture the bikes. There's no uneven seams or welding in their gas tanks. The paint is extremely high quality. I've seen Harley-Davidsons that are 20, 30 years old that have the original paint on them still, and it still looks great. They just hold up really, really well. The quality of parts are just really high quality. Things from the finger controls to just the wheels, the trim around the bike, the seats, everything is just a notch above the competition, and the quality is it's definitely there. If you haven't really taken a close look at Harley and their fit and finish and the quality of the parts that are involved in the builds, I would definitely recommend taking a closer look and really comparing some of the bikes next to each other. There's something there really to be said for Harley-Davidson quality. Here's a Victory motorcycle here, and I've seen a lot of these bikes and a lot of the competitor bikes, every make and model and stuff, and just going through them really closely and looking at just like the build quality. And when you say the term fit and finish is thrown out there quite a bit, and really when you reference fit, just the way that things and parts fit together on the bike, and really functionally how they fit together, and also aesthetically fit together, really the Harley-Davidson does a really, really good job. These are just really beautiful bikes. And there's a lot of artistry that goes into the conceptual stages of designing these Harley-Davidsons, and so the fit and finish on a Harley is just a lot better than most. So that costs money. That's not free. I will say too, that Harley-Davidsons hold their value better than any motorcycle out there, bar none. And so, yes, it is an investment to get a Harley, but chances are you're one day going to move to a different motorcycle, move up to a different Harley or whatever it may be. Well, you're going to have a better resale value than any other make of motorcycle out there. So that money you invest, you're going to get a lot of it back when you turn around and trade it in or sell it or whatever you may do. The last point I'll make is I think a lot of people don't actually look at the price tags. So many times as I've sold Harley-Davidsons over the years, I've had people walk in and actually look at the price tag of a Harley. And a lot of people, I think, are shocked, and they make comments like, wow, I didn't realize that Harleys actually are so affordable. That, and I think a lot of times people don't actually compare the prices. I would say compare the price of competing models of Harley-Davidsons to Indians or Victory. Of course, Victory's out of business now, but like a Honda Goldwing against like an Electroglide Ultra Classic, or some of these other cruiser bikes that are out there. And I think you'd be very surprised that Harley-Davidsons really aren't that much more expensive than the competitors, and sometimes they're less expensive. So, and the thought that Harley-Davidson just blindly charges more for their bikes because they know people will buy them because they're Harley, that couldn't be further from the truth. Harley-Davidson, and me working for Harley-Davidson and my family working for Harley-Davidson for almost 60 years now, I've obviously had a glimpse into the business side of Harley-Davidson, and they're very aggressive in how they price their bikes, and they're very aware of the competition. They're not too ignorant, or they're not too proud or arrogant to think that they can just charge whatever they want and people are just going to pay for it. They posture themselves extremely competitively against the competition, and they take the competition extremely serious. So, if you've got a like model and a competitor is a lot less money than the Harley-Davidson is, and you get about the same type of class of motorcycle, then Harley-Davidson's is going to get crushed. But obviously Harley's doing something right. In the heavy cruiser segment, 600cc or greater on-road motorcycles, Harley-Davidson has more than half of the market share in North America, and so they're totally dominant. Which, another side note, sometimes I hear the comments, people saying that Harley's getting smashed now by Victory, or Harley's getting smashed now by Indian. That's not true. Has Harley-Davidson lost market share in the last 2 years? Yeah, they have lost a little bit of market share. Are their stock shares down right now? Yeah, their stock shares are down right now. Do they still have a dominant lion's share of the market in heavy cruisers in the United States? Yeah, absolutely. The market share that Victory had before they went out of business was like 1 or 2%. In Indians probably 3 or 4%, and Harley's over 50% of North America heavy cruiser market share. So Harley-Davidson is still definitely, absolutely dominating this, and it's not because people are just blindly buying them because of the Harley-Davidson nameplate. It's because Harley-Davidsons have the value and they've got a really good product, and that's why people buy them. So let me get into the fourth and final misconception, guys. And that misconception is that Harley-Davidson is no longer a motorcycle company. They're just a really good marketing company. And because their marketing and their image is so strong, they just persuade people to buy their motorcycles, even though their motorcycles are inferior, overpriced, heavy, underpowered bikes. But they're really good at marketing them, so people buy them. Let me start off addressing this one by saying that Harley-Davidson is the longest continuously running American motorcycle manufacturer in the world. So people aren't going to just gonna keep buying Harley-Davidsons just based on how well they get marketed to. After you buy one and invest a lot of money in one, if it's not up to par and your experience on the bike wasn't good, people aren't gonna buy them anymore. People aren't stupid. And so, having this kind of longevity and being around for, almost 115 years now, that doesn't happen because they put pretty ads in newspapers or pretty advertisements on the TV that entice people to buy stuff. Also, I'll say too, Harley-Davidson really doesn't, comparatively speaking, doesn't spend that much money on marketing. Usually the best marketing comes from other people riding their motorcycles and just the culture that has been ingrained in the American culture with Harley-Davidson motorcycles. That is kind of what sells these bikes. That, and when people buy them and have owned them, they like them, and so they buy them again. This thought that Harley-Davidson is a clothing company, a t-shirt company now, and that people just buy them because of the image. It's just not true. So to people that really think that Harley-Davidson is just a marketing company and they don't care so much about their product and their motorcycles, I would really say ask yourself, when was the last time you saw a Harley-Davidson commercial on TV, or when you really saw a Harley-Davidson advertisement on the radio or anywhere? Because really, I pay attention to these things and I never hear them. The places I see Harley is when you watch UFC. Harley-Davidson has a big deal with UFC right now, so you'll see their logos and they'll be mentioned on pay-per-view with the UFC. And at the X Games, they have a big deal with the X Games right now where they advertise their motorcycles, and they have a lot of their Bar and Shield logos in various key places as well. But besides that, you really don't see much marketing for Harley-Davidson at all. Really, it's word of mouth, and it's just heritage and culture. Riders advertise for them. You go to any major motorcycling event, Sturgis, Daytona Beach, Laughlin, for those of us who live in Southern California here, any big major motorcycle rally, most of the bikes there are going to be Harley-Davidsons, and people don't ride them because they like the sound of Harley-Davidson. It's because they're great functional bikes that are high quality. They're very reliable. And I'm actually going to do 5 biggest misconceptions. So I'm going to go on to the 5th one in a minute. But another thing that Harley-Davidson is really good at is they leverage their past models and the style and the heritage of their past models, and they implement styling and naming into their newer models. It's like, in the late 1960s when muscle cars were really, really popular. Everybody talks about their Chevelle or their Mustang or whatever it may be. And people lift up their hoods and you look in there, these old car shows, and you can see all the fancy chromed out parts and everything, and the engineering is real simple, and you can see the entire engine and its beauty and everything. And that's exactly what Harley-Davidson delivers, is you can see the engine, you can swap parts out for chrome parts or black parts or whatever you want to do, and they showcase the engine. Most bikes, now that are, Japanese or whatever else, they're covered up by plastic shroud. You can't see it. You open up a hood of a late model, muscle car nowadays, and all you see is a big plastic cover. You can't really see the engine. So what Harley-Davidson really does well at, and I'm getting off the subject now, is they have the aesthetics and the appeal and the simplicity of engineering that's still, beautiful engineering. Their bikes are very beautiful, but they implement new technology into the old aesthetics, and that makes a Harley-Davidson great. That's really at the core of Harley-Davidson, is the beautiful, simplistic engineering with modern technology implemented. Again, I would compare that to, if you go to like an old muscle car show or something like that, they all pop their hoods, right? Well, they want to show off the engine. That's something unique to old muscle cars, and that same type of appeal has been conserved by Harley-Davidson, and so that's really a big appeal to Harley-Davidson. So I started off this video thinking I was going to do the top 4 misconceptions about Harley-Davidson, but as I've just been talking through this, I'm going to do 5. So number 5 is Harley-Davidson motorcycles are unreliable. I don't get this one as much as I used to, but it's still out there. Just people think that Harley-Davidsons break down and that they're going to be costly with maintenance and that you're going to be left on the side of the road stranded because Harley-Davidsons leak oil and they just are unreliable. Their engines are always failing, and that if you go with something like a Honda, that's going to be more reliable. So let me start off by saying that, again, this is kind of an unfair comparison. A lot of times people are comparing modern Japanese bikes to old Harleys. And when I say old Harleys, I'm talking like 30, 40 years ago. So, there was a time where, Harley-Davidsons were less reliable than they are now. I fully admit that. There was a time in the 70s when a company called AMF bought Harley out, basically, and for a decade or so, the quality of their product was subpar, and they would leak oil, and they weren't as reliable. And then in the early 80s, Harley-Davidson, bought them back or whatever, and that's when they came out with the FXR, and they made a big comeback. But I'll just say this, guys: any Harley that's been made, since we'll say in the last 20 years, is extremely reliable. I've been riding Harleys for a long time now, and I've never been stranded on the side of the road, not one time. I've never had one break down on me. I've had parts, wear out, and the wearing of a part was caught at a service and it was replaced, but it didn't necessarily need to be changed at that time. I just decided to prevent future problems. But am I saying that Harley-Davidsons don't break down and they're impossible to break down and they're totally immune to mechanical problems? No, absolutely not. There's not a single machine or vehicle in the entire world that man has created that has been 100% flawless and that does not break down. Man just has not created one yet. I don't think he ever will. But to say that Harley-Davidsons are less reliable than some of the competitors is just completely false. The other thing is a lot of people will say, well, Harleys leak oil. That's part of, it being a Harley, ha. Harleys don't leak oil anymore. If they do leak oil and there's a drip underneath your Harley, well, then there's a problem. You need to have it checked out. But to say that they leak oil and that's just part of ownership of a Harley, that's completely false. You can go into any Harley shop that has used bikes, and for the most part, you're not going to see any oil on the ground. There's just not going to be any drips of oil all over the floor. Anybody that has a bike that's younger than 20 years, will tell you the same thing. Their Harley don't leak oil. So yeah, this is kind of a stumbling block for some people, and it's kind of a popular thing for people to talk about, that they bought XYZ model over, or XYZ make over a Harley-Davidson is because they wanted to buy something that had the reliability. Well, trust me when I say Harley-Davidsons, especially the newer ones, are just as reliable as any bike out there. In addition to this point I'm trying to make, I will say too that parts and service on these motorcycles are more readily available than any other motorcycle, and I'm talking about just North America. I can't really say that for the entire world, but in North America there are about 670, 680 Harley-Davidson dealerships around the country, and more aftermarket companies make parts for Harleys than any other brand or make of motorcycle in the world. And so, service is readily available. The parts and maintenance are actually less expensive than a lot of the European and Japanese motorcycles. So, when you go in for a service, it's not cheap, but at the same time, there's more expensive bikes out there. I can definitely say that. Are there cheaper bikes out there? Yeah, there are. But as far as service and parts and the availability of it, they're definitely more readily available for it.
And this can also be beneficial when you're customizing your bike. And I'm probably repeating myself now, but no two people are the same. Everyone's a different height, everyone's different weight, and body size, shape, and so there's a lot of options out there where you can customize your bike to fit your needs, your specific needs. Whereas on a lot of these other bikes, especially like sport bikes and things like that, you don't have a whole lot of options on your foot controls, or your bars, or your seating position. It is what it is. So anyways, guys, this video went a lot longer than I thought it was going to go, but sometimes I get carried away. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video and you got some information out of it that helped you out, give me a thumbs up. And if you have someone, a friend or whoever, that maybe doesn't understand some of these points that I went over, share the video with them. If you haven't already, subscribe. And I got more Harley-Davidson content coming your way. Thanks a lot, guys.